Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This cosmos is called double-click rose, and I'd never grown it before. And it was late to flower, but boy is it worth the wait, because it has just been a mass of these glorious double pink petals, and it will go on flowering for another couple of months, or at least until the first frost. But the key to cosmos, and an awful lot of annuals at this time of year, is to keep deadheading them daily. And if you go back to either another flower bud or a leaf, that will provoke more side shoots, and it's the side shoots that flower. Otherwise, they'll just convert into seeds and put all their energy into that. And then combined with some roses and the dahlias and the sweet peas and the fennel, there's still an awful lot of colour and flower left in the garden to last us through the summer. The reason why Ned, by the way, is so obsessively interested in me, because normally he's not as much as this, is because in my pocket, Ned, I've got a ball. And you've got to admit that is much more beautiful than any flower. At least it is if you're Ned. Now, coming up on today's programme. Rachel explores a garden in Devon that has been transformed from a pig farm to a planted paradise.
Although this is very much a garden, it has a naturalistic quality because it just drifts off beautifully into the hillside beyond, so it feels like it's always been here.
We meet a gardener in Somerset who's filled his garden with quirky structures, all made from salvaged wood.
I never use a drawing, you do it all in your head, rather like an artist with a painting, you know. And once you start, you just keep going.
Francis discovers the surprising medicinal properties of some of our favourite flowers.
These are just edible as well. I mean, you could eat the petals in salads.
Yeah,
That's what I grow them for.
Yeah, they're nice for garnish. It's anti-inflammatory, it's antifungal, antibacterial, anti-hemorrhage, antimicrobial. So the list is endless, really.
And I shall be pruning roses and propagating oranges. This is a grass. It's called Anamanthele lesoniana, or pheasant grass. And it has a habit of seeding itself all over the place, usually where you don't want it and where it's not easy to move it. But by seeding itself in this trough, it means that I can move it very easily, and I've got somewhere where it will work perfectly. So, I will now rehome that. Now here at the front of the grass border, I've got a gap. So perfect for putting this grass. Now, I don't know if you can see, I've got two grasses there, 1 and 2. And I think the best thing to do would be to separate them and fill another gap. So if I just gently tease that apart. These are tough plants, so don't be too precious about them. With your thumbs, get in there and just tease them apart, trying to keep as much root as possible on both of them. There we go. It's as dry as a bone, but quite happy. And actually, that's one of the things about Anamanthele, is it used to be classified as part of the steeper family, and that gives you a clue of how it likes to grow. Really good drainage, doesn't mind being hot and dry, but hates sitting in too wet ground. They seed themselves very freely, so you've always got new plants, but don't expect the parent plant to live more than, well, 3 years is quite good. And they are not fully hardy. And although that doesn't fill the space now, it will. They grow quite big, that will easily fill that space and do the job without any trouble at all. So that's good. Now I've got the other one here, but I don't want to put that in the grass borders, so I'll go and pop this up in the orchard beds, along with some other plants. Come on, Ned, come on, good boy. Good boy. The truth is, it's not just the one empty gap I've got that I want to fill. If I go around the garden and I'm honest, it's full of gaps and spaces that appear at this time of year, partly as a result of earlier planting dying back, having done their things, whether they're bulbs or early perennials. And so the secret is to move plants around. Now, obviously, I've got this anamanthele, which will go in here. Let's take that out, which we don't want. I have to say that the combination of anamanthele that likes good drainage and lots of sunshine with hydrangea, which likes it to be damp and have some shade, is not an obvious one. You'll never see that in the textbooks, but it will work. This is a plant that will grow almost anywhere. So we'll pop that in here on the edge. There we go. I will, of course, have to water that and the other one I put in, but I've just got a couple more plants to put in first, and they're here. This is a geranium phaeum that I took from the cottage garden when we took out the hedges and the pear trees. I've had them in pots really ever since then, almost a year, and now this will be a good place for them. That will be fine underneath the tree because geranium phaeum is one of the few plants that really will be perfectly healthy and happy in dry shade. And I've got another one which will pop in there. And it's just filling the gap. It's really creating ground cover. And ground cover is not glamorous, but it's really useful because you have that understory from which then you can think about the colour and the forms and the shapes that you're going to build above it. Right, let's get them in the ground. Now, while I'm planting these, we're going to Newton Abbot in Devon to join Rachel, who this time last year went to visit a garden that has been created from one of the most inauspicious beginnings you could imagine.
Stepping into this garden, it feels like it's been here forever. There's a timeless quality to the drifts of planting nestled in rolling countryside. It's hard to imagine what came before this pocket of serene loveliness, especially when not so long ago the garden looked very different. Jenny and Jethro Miles bought an ex-pig farm in 2002. 10 acres of concrete slabs, asbestos-filled sheds and slurry pits on a Devon hillside. Over the last 20 years, they've slowly built a series of gardens which is unrecognisable from the original space. What you've achieved here is extraordinary, but it must have been overwhelming at the very beginning.
I think we had something like rose-tinted glasses on when we came here, but we were taking out bits of tractor that had been buried, all sorts of rubbish and detritus.
100,000-gallon slurry tank, wasn't it, to start with, which had to be emptied, which was...
That must have been fun.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It was a complete blank canvas, which was very overwhelming. Right from the beginning, we wanted it to be a place for wildlife, and it just happened a lot quicker than we thought, really, as soon as you dug out the first pond.
I said to Jenny, look out the window, we've got a duck. That was the first thing that appeared. And actually, the swans appeared the same week, later on in the week, just coming up the stream. As we sort of got rid of the concrete and put the greenery and the water in, the wildlife arrived.
So, Jenny, did you have a very clear idea of the sort of plants you wanted to grow?
I came across some books which had prairie planting in, and it just grabbed me.
On this scale, Jenny's prairie planting is so effective, and the long borders which run next to the pond are filled with a gorgeous range of late-season perennials. Well, given the size of the garden, Jenny has very cleverly restricted her colour palette. So you've got these lovely soft pinks, things like the echinacea, dark reds with the sanguisorba, and she also uses repetition. She has the same plants moving all the way through this planting, things like the phlomis and the fennel, and then it's all tied together beautifully with soft melding grasses, so you've got that movement with the Molinia and the steeper gigantea. Looks very simple, It's very clever. Jenny has a particular fondness for umbellifers, which have these multiple tiny, tiny little flowers on a flattened flower head. And they're absolutely brilliant for attracting pollinators and other beneficial insects. I love this one. This is Dorcas carota, particularly because it's got that lovely, soft, rosy pink, which is so prevalent in this border, but also because of the way that after it's finished flowering, the flowers just curl up like a goblet. It's a beauty. Although this is very much a garden, it has a naturalistic quality because they've built here this bank which is made of the spoil, lumps of concrete and so on, and now you'd never know it, and it just drifts off beautifully into the hillside beyond, so it feels like it's always been here. And I think that's helped by the choice of plants as well. So you've got native things that you would see in the hedgerows and in the verges. There are some lovely ferns, and then this, the eupatorium, which can be sort of really big and thuggish. But actually Jenny's been very clever here too, and she's just cut down, chopped the stems around the edges in May, the Chelsea chop, effectively, and that means that you've got later flowering, so the flowers are staggered, and also they act as a kind of support for the rest of the plant, and it just looks much prettier, I think. And look at these beautiful dark purple stems. Away from the main garden, there are other areas where Jenny's experimented with the soil and growing conditions. This is just the most heavenly part of the garden. It's beautiful. You've got two meadows, very distinctly separated. So tell me what's going on this side.
Well, this is a perennial wildlife meadow, and that was seeded initially 18 years ago now. But I love it because of the variety of succession of plants you get through the year. Knapweed, and I think there's some field scabious is still going, but it's quietened down a bit now.
What in the perennial meadow do you think is the main criteria, the main thing you need to know?
I think you're really trying to reduce the nutrients in the soil as far as you can, and we do that really by the way we manage it. So at the end of the year, the farmer comes in and cuts the hay and bales it, and then it's taken right away, and about a month later we have sheep on that eat the regrowth and make little divots around, hopefully for new flowers to seed.
What about this here? These are annuals, yeah?
These are annual flowers, yes, and they like completely the opposite really, in really high nutrient soil they thrive in. So we do add compost to this, and sow early in the year, and they'll go right through now till sort of autumn.
I mean, it looks wonderful. I think it's a really good way to explain the difference between what people think of as a wildflower meadow. I think they picture this.
Absolutely,
But actually, of course, British native meadows look like that.
Yes.
So do you feel happy with how things are at the moment? Do you think you've achieved your goal here?
I think with this meadow, I love it, and it's probably at its peak. The perennial meadow is perhaps a different story. Give me another 20 years and perhaps it'll be just how I want it.
What's 20 years? And beyond the prairies and meadows, the courtyard shows how Jethro and Jenny have worked with the conditions available to create a garden with a completely different feel. Unlike the really rich growing conditions elsewhere in the garden, here it's built on rubble. So you've just got a spade's depth of very gritty, thin soil, but actually that's perfect for plants like this hazy blue of the Perovskia. This silvery foliage, always a good indicator of a drought-tolerant plant. And then in this corner, dominated by that architectural cardoon. But the thing I think that really ties together all the spaces in this garden is a passion for water. You've got this lovely still pool. There's a wall fountain, that lovely gentle burbling sound. And then a rather unusual water feature. This garden has gone from pig farm to paradise, but it's always daunting creating a new garden from scratch, whether it's a small patio or 10 acres. I think the guidelines are always the same. Have a plan, but be prepared to deviate from that. Also, take your time. Nobody wants an instant garden. And above all, make sure that you sit back occasionally and just enjoy the beauty you've made.
Rachel is, of course, absolutely right. It's really important. However grand the task of making a garden, to find time to stop and just enjoy it. However, I'm going to focus on work now, because here in the writing garden is a big space that needs filling. And what I've chosen is a really reliable late summer, early autumn flower, which is the Japanese anemone. And this is a variety called Honorine Joubert. It's very well known, and that's because it's a good one. They will last for years and years and perform in almost any situation. They don't mind shade, they don't mind it dry, they don't mind sunshine. The only thing they don't like is sitting in very soggy soil. I'm going to plant them as a little group underneath this cardu in here. And that will give a good solid display, which then I can use to work around. Right, it's just a question of digging a hole and getting them in. That like that, and then this one can go in front. Now these will flower from now through to October, if you're lucky. And whenever you plant anything, water it in, which not only gives it a drink, but moves the soil tightly around the roots and makes good contact. But particularly at this time of year, because the soil will be dry, the weather will be warm, they need water. And if it doesn't rain for another 2 or 3 weeks, well, then give them another drink. And thereafter, they should be able to look after themselves. And they should be there for years to come. Now, we're going to Somerset, to a garden near Taunton. It belongs to Nigel Palfrey. And he's created it over the last 50 years into something that is distinctly unique.
My garden is therapeutic. It's always evolving. It's quirky, it's eccentric. And I suppose, as people often politely hint, it's like me. This garden has been in my family for 200 years, thereabouts. It's rather special because it's full of memories, but most of what you see I planted from 50 to 20 years ago. My style of planting is informal, casual. The foxgloves are all self-seeded. I like the self-seeding. It's quite cheap, really. Although it's slightly overgrown, I think Breeza Maxima is certainly one of my favourites. It's short-lived, but it's a happy plant. It draws the eye in by its colour, its texture, its tone. I love grasses because it's like a moth. When you start to study them closely, you realise what patterns, variation, colours. And I cut a few, and then I hang them up for 2 or 3 days, let them dry, and tie them up with string. And during the winter months, I can look at that. Some areas are quite controlled. There's a lot of little vistas, a lot of little garden rooms. That's part of it. That's what it makes it so interesting. Occasionally I come along and pull something up, but invariably it can get on with it. These are bowers. I've always called them bowers. Essentially, it's bent young growth. This is hazel. It's out of the garden. This is the finished product. They take about 2 to 3 hours to make. I usually do these every year. I made the gate about 25 years ago. Now this is standing dead sweet chestnut. And it's got a little hole here so the hedgehogs can come through, and it's dog-proof. And then you've got the cotoneaster growing over that, lovely. Come on, Ruru, come in. Yeah. This is hamstone, which is local. It was a gatepost. It was in the salvage yard, and I paid 1 tin of drink. I've been influenced very much by the past. Over the years, I've had great interests in building, architecture, horticulture, agriculture. So I've always had this interest. You go to the salvage yard, you could pick up real gems. I've just got that zest for it, I suppose. When I built this garden, it was with the intention that I live here and a lot of other things, what we call nature, birds, insects, anything. So I know I'm also contributing to wildlife. Now these are naturally hollow. I've put salvage lead on the top, and they're for bats, frogs. The great tits will go in there. The small holes, that's for blue tits. So this is my crinkle crankle folly. And I got the idea from this branch. As you come down through, a lot of shade, so of course ferns like it. The idea is something like The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings. Crinkle crankle really means twisted, bent. I think it's lovely words. Years and years ago, before barbed wire, netting, string was invented, you used the resources that you had to hand. Now what does last long is sweet chestnut, standing dead, and oak. You cannot just go into a wood and take anything. You should ask permission. Quite often people will say, yes, you can have it, you're welcome to it. So anyway, I started, and it's taken 2 bottles of whiskey, 2 jars of jam, a large bag of chocolate, many thank yous, and 1 burnt out clutch because I overloaded my car. We're 3 tons and over 1,000 screws. I always think a good garden always should be full of secrets, full of excitement, and this is excitement through here. I'm not really sure what you would call this room. We have tea in here sometimes. In the summertime, it's lovely, especially when it's hot. The birds rather like it in the wintertime. And of course there's a robin up here now, which proves that I'm not the only one that likes it. I never use a drawing, you do it all in your head, rather like an artist with a painting. You know, usually you've got an idea, but it's in the subconscious. And once you start, you just keep going. A number of people come in and they all leave smiling. So I know that it makes people happy, and I get great pleasure out of that.
I think Nigel exemplifies a really important aspect of gardening, which is just to have fun, to enjoy every aspect of it. We're so solemn about gardening with its Latin names and rare plants and plants that are difficult to grow and what we should and shouldn't do, and forget that sometimes the main reason to garden is to enjoy it. Now this is an orange, and I want to take a cutting. Most citrus, certainly commercially, are grafted onto rootstock, which means that the top part, the part that has the fruit, is one plant, and then down there, the roots that grow is another. And the roots will determine how it grows, how big, how small, how it reacts to certain soil or climatic conditions, and then the top, obviously, the fruit. So by taking a cutting, you're guaranteed to get exactly the same top, but not the same roots, so it may grow much bigger, it may grow smaller. but nevertheless, it's a good way to do it. Now, what you want to look for, ideally, is 1-year-old growth. And it can be as thick as a pencil. There's a nice shoot down in here. There's one perfect one. And I'm going to take it really low down, go nice and low, and take that out. So there I have my cut material. I now need to deal with it. Now, the key thing with citrus cuttings is that they need to have a number of nodes on them. Nodes is one of those words that I think is a bit intimidating, but basically it means the bit from where leaves grow. That's all you need to worry about. So with a stem like that, we can get more than one cutting. Right, there I have, and I can take that off, I have 2 leaves and 1, 2, 3 other nodes. So I've got 5 nodes. So that's a cutting. And I can work my way down doing that. Now, I have to say, all my instincts are to reduce those leaf sizes, and you do that by cutting them in half. But I don't often take citrus cuttings. The other day, I looked up all the best advice, and it was just to leave the leaves whole, so I will. Like most cuttings, they don't need any nutrition at all to grow their roots. What they need is water and oxygen. So it doesn't matter what you use, whether it be perlite, sand, grit, which is what I've got, a mixture of all that in here, but just a nice, open, loose mix. So we'll put that into a container like that. And then these can go in the corner. So we'll push that in, and the really important thing is that they have heat and moisture. You can hand mist it, or you can do as we do with other cuttings, you can water them and then put one of these sealed bags over the top and then tighten it round the pot, and that will trap all the moisture that evaporates from the leaves and from the compost. And they should root in about 6 to 8 weeks. You can either put them on when you see signs of roots and new growth, but protect them over winter. So having potted them on, they will need to be in a conservatory, on a windowsill, or in a greenhouse. And then next spring, you can give them the soil that they want and grow them on, and in a year or two, you'll have a marvellous new orange. Now, still to come on today's programme. Frances learns more about the health benefits of some of our favourite garden plants.
I do find it so interesting that you're using these natural, often defence mechanisms of plants. And isn't it amazing that they actually can heal us too?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the
magical.
beauty of it. That's the beauty of plant-based natural medicine.
And we meet a man who fell in love with orchids at 15 and now has a collection of many thousands.
I can't imagine a life without orchids. I love the challenge they give. They are hard work, they're tricky, but on the other hand, they're deeply rewarding when they flower.
But first, we're going to Reading to visit one of your gardens.
Hello, my name is Alison Taylor, and I want to share with you my passion for growing roses. I'm particularly interested in how to plant around and under the roses to enhance their beauty, and also how they complement other plants. My passion is for letting plants self-seed around my garden, creating a very loose cottage garden style, and most importantly, getting lots of free plants in the process. I started to plant these beds in 2015 with the idea of having roses as the main frame and creating herbaceous borders, but my passion for roses quickly took over and they became the dominant feature. For a rose to be in this garden, they have to smell as good as they look. Every morning I get up and I come out in the garden and do a sniff tour of all the roses. Here I've planted Sedum Purple Emperor underneath a bright yellow rose, which is the poet's wife. The beautiful yellow flowers being highlighted spectacularly against the purple. You'll see growing alongside on the left here, Stachys, again which was never planted in this garden. It suddenly appeared one year having self-seeded and I left it where it is. And every year now it grows to true magnificence and the fabulous purple spikes look amazing against the yellow roses. Thank you for sharing this tour of my roses. I hope you can see that after investing in the core plants, actually by letting things self-seed and do their own thing in the garden to an extent, you can create the most amazing cottage garden look without spending vast amounts of money.
I love the idea of Alison having a sniff tour of her garden every morning. What a fabulous concept. Now, we would love to hear from you if you've got a really good idea or technique or device, something you've done or are doing in your garden that you would like to share with us. And you can get all the details about how you can go about that by going to our website. Go on. Good boy. Over the years, I've planted masses of roses here at Longmeadow. I adore them. And one of the less celebrated groups of roses are species roses. And they are the rose that you find growing in the wild. They are the pure form, if you like, from which hybrids are made in their permutations to create the garden roses that we all know and love. And they have certain characteristics. The first is the flowers tend to be small and single. They're not showy, but they also have a kind of purity about them, a simplicity that I love. And of course, the best known species rose in this country is the dog rose you see growing in hedgerows, Rosa canina. And some of them need pruning because they do grow with real vigor, and perhaps none more so than Rosa moysii, which I've got here. The time to prune species roses is as soon as they finish flowering, which usually is sort of late July, early August. So we're a little bit late on that, but it's still perfectly okay. And if you cut it back to the height that you want it, so let's say I want it to grow that height, rather than as tall as it is, so the flowers are around about filling this space, all that will happen is that you'll get this thicket of growth coming from the pruned point. So if you want to reduce the height, you need to go back right down, sometimes to the ground, or at least to the point at which you're happy to have the permanent structure. And then you get your side shoots going. So if I go in there like that, so I'm going to take this right back down to there, so it's the same height as the other growth point. I just caught it before it prickled my head. Now, you don't need to do this every year. I tend to prune species roses about once every 3 or 4 years because I quite like them to be big. But there is a point at which they get too big. And that's going to vary according to what space you have, what your taste is, how you want them to look, and how you want them to grow. But don't be put off growing them because they grow big. Don't be put off growing them because they only produce flowers once, because they have charm. Now we're going to join Francis, who last year went up to Derbyshire to visit the Welida Biodynamic Garden.
Most of us garden and grow plants to enjoy them, to admire them, or to eat them. Some of us even grow plants for medicinal or health reasons. Here, that is the only reason that they're growing plants, and it is on a massive scale. Here on this 13-acre site of meadows, woodlands and gardens, every single plant is grown to use in herbal medicines and remedies. Along with her team, Jennifer Rouge is responsible for looking after and growing each and every one of these plants from seed to harvest. So Jennifer, tell me about this garden.
And this is our medicinal plant garden. We grow over 50 different medicinal plants in this garden, and we grow everything biodynamic, which is organic. And we make those plants into herbal remedies and homeopathic remedies. We use the whole plant, so all the active ingredients and components go into a remedy that we make here.
And I guess that's different because, yeah, you've got everything rather than just the single synthesized compound that you'd get in a pharmaceutical pill or whatever.
Yeah, that's it. It's holistic.
And what's the benefits of that?
The benefit is that we have evolved with plants for thousands of years, so there is more bioavailability in the remedies that we use here, which will help work in our bodies. So here we've got Echinacea pallida, and that's a really good plant for its anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. So we use it in our skincare. We use the whole plant, so that's a fantastic example of where we use the roots, the leaves, the stems and the flowers.
I'm so glad to hear, because I grow this because I love it. I think it's beautiful, and so do the bees, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely, they love it.
So many hoverflies on them.
Frances, this is my favourite plant in the garden.
Is it?
You probably recognise it, Althea officinalis, marshmallow,
Yeah.
white mallow. And it's my favourite plant because it has so many different qualities. Althea, the word gives it away, derived from the Greek to heal. Medicinally, what is used is the root. But culinary, this plant has been used for thousands of years.
Yeah, loads of mallows, if not all of them, are actually edible leaves, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. The small fresh leaves can be used in cooking, the flowers can be used for pickling. The plant itself has waters and sugars in the roots that create a bit like a gel-like substance. And the plant uses that as a protection, like a protective barrier against the elements, really. And we make use of that in plant medicine. The same substance, the gel-like substance, the mucilage, is used in skincare products. It's the same kind of protective barrier, the soothing and calming properties for sensitive skin or baby skin or people with eczema or that kind of stuff, you know.
But I do find it so interesting that you're using these natural, often defence mechanisms of plants, so this barrier of mucus in the roots and the leaves, but also things like with the thyme next door, the volatile oils and phyto or plant chemicals that are in the plants, that they've evolved. And isn't it amazing that they actually can heal us too?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the
magic.
beauty of it. That's the beauty of plant-based natural medicine.
Yeah. Thank you. Calendula. I know this is really medicinal, isn't it? But how do you use this?
So we use all the plant parts above ground. It's called a herba harvest that includes everything you see here, the flowers and the leaves and the stem. So when you pick up a flower, it's kind of a bit sticky to the touch.
Yes.
So calendula has a resin inside where a lot of the active ingredients are concentrated, but also the orange colour gives away some of the properties because the more orange in colour, the more carotenoids it has.
And these are just edible as well. I mean, you could eat the petals in salad.
Yeah,
That's what I grow them for.
Yeah, they're nice for garnish. You can even eat the leaves. They're slightly bit bitter, but they add a nice addition to salads as well. It's anti-inflammatory, it's antifungal, antibacterial, anti-hemorrhage, antimicrobial. So the list is endless, really. It's a very generous giving plant in terms of its properties.
Isn't it fantastic? Such a common little plant, so useful. Also useful as a gardener, as a companion plant to go with other crops. Keep aphids away and things like that. So such a, as you say, generous plant.
Absolutely.
I didn't expect to see aconite here. Is this a medicinal plant? Because it's so poisonous.
You're right there, aconite is the most poisonous plants in Europe. And that's why when we're working with aconite, we have a lot of respect for it, as in we protect ourselves because the whole plant is poisonous, including the roots. We harvest the entire plant and we make it into a remedy that's often used if you want to treat a sudden onset of respiratory issues like a cold.
I mean, it's so obvious with something like this, which is so poisonous, and then also other poisonous plants like foxglove and yew, which have you know, medicinal use too, but you just shouldn't mess around with them. But I kind of also think that all plants, unless you really know what you're doing, you just shouldn't dabble and mess around with them, because they can have some really powerful compounds. You don't necessarily know how they'll affect you.
Yeah, absolutely. Always have to consult a practitioner before taking any medication, whether it's herbal or not.
Exactly, and especially if you're on medication from your doctor as well, just always double check that it's safe for you to take something else. We gardeners love our plants, of course we do, but just sometimes we might begin to take them for granted slightly. Even common calendula or herbs like rosemary and lavender and thyme, or ornamental plants like echinacea have so much more about them than just the way they look. We have a whole history with these plants, and it's not just medicinal, they do all kinds of things. Now for me, the more I know about a particular species, the more respect I have for it, and the more it fascinates me.
It is a timely reminder that plants aren't just categorized into looking good or tasting good or doing you good. Many, many plants work in multiple ways, and of course historically people have used that. Now, in terms of taste, I like the look of sweet corn, but it's for the cobs that we grow them. And some of them are now ready. You can tell by looking at the tassel. If it's still green and pale, then the cob isn't right. But if, like this one here is a good one, if it's dark and has browned off, then the chances are it's ripe. And if I break this off, and when you pick them, the way to do it is just to break them. So if it should just break off in my hand like that. And then if we open it out, now look at that, Ned, look at that. The beauty of sweet corn grown at home is that it does have that extra edge of sweetness. And personally, I like them best just boiled, slathered with butter, and then eaten, and just don't worry about the mess, just enjoy it. Right, pop that down there for the moment. I'm going to sow some turnips on a patch of ground. If you sow turnips now when the soil is warm, they'll grow quite quickly, and they'll be ready to harvest round about October, November time. I like turnips when they're quite small. So rather than having a great big turnip that gets a little bit woody, if you harvest them when they're about golf ball size, they're absolutely delicious. So I've prepared the ground. I'll just give it a light rake over. There we go. I've got two varieties here. I've got Snowball, which is a pure white turnip, and I've got Milan purple top, which is flatter, less of a ball, with a pinky purple top and white underneath. So we'll sow the Milan purple top first. And just draw a drill with the side of my hands, like that. An inch or so deep is plenty. Now obviously when you're sowing seeds direct, the secret is to do it as thinly as possible. So each seed would ideally be about 2 inches apart. We can take the board up, ready for the next, which will go there. We take for granted that we grow vegetables in rows, but the reason you do is mainly so you can keep them weeded. Because when they start to appear, there may well be weeds in amongst them and in between them. And in order that you can put a hoe down them and weed them successfully, you do need to know where they are likely to be. Whereas if you just broadcast them across the area, you can't do that. And that's really the best reason for growing veg in rows. Now, to go from turnips, which I like very much, but I have to confess, a pretty humble fare, to flowers that many would regard as the most exotic and the most beautiful in the whole of the floral kingdom.
I think I love the detail of the orchids. I like the idea that it stands apart from other plants as something which you don't usually see, something which is a bit different. I like the way the petals sometimes present themselves. I like the colour, I like the markings, I like the spots sometimes around the edge. In total, I have probably about 100,000 orchids. Typically, I wake up and I spend about an hour saying good morning to them, making sure they're all up and awake. And then in the evening, I'll spend a couple of hours just putting them to bed, making sure they're happy. So we started with one greenhouse, we've ended up with 4. It has grown to a bit of obsession, but it does keep me out of mischief. And my love for orchids really started when I was 15, where I used to grow orchids called cymbidiums. Then later on in life, when I did my A-levels, my mum gave me the opportunity of, if I did well, she'd treat me to an orchid. And I've still got it now, 38 years later. Cattleya recitals the name, and it still flowers to this day. When you look at the plants, sometimes they have faces on them, and those faces are characters. Each one, tells a story, and sometimes does look like a face. Each one has a different kind of beauty. There are some which have lovely long tails. Other ones, they have their own natural charm of being from the UK. Other ones are very small. So in this greenhouse, we have a range of plants. I've called it the jungle for obvious reasons. I'm very excited about this plant. It's called Dendrophylax lindinii. It's nicknamed the Florida ghost orchid. It's nearly extinct in the swamps in Florida, but we do have some here which I have propagated from seed. And they have no leaves at all. So all the photosynthesis happens within the root, which is the green pigmentation, and they give you a lovely little white flower, about so big, with little tails. And if you're in the forest, in the swamps, it does look like a little ghost hanging from a tree.
I'm Christine Turner and I'm Mark's mum, but I'm also known as Tina, so it's Tina Turner. Oh, that's beautiful.
That's Rungsurianum.
Haven't seen that one before, but it's beautiful. How long has he been out?
It's been out for about 2 weeks, but the leaves never get wider than that, and it has these huge, gorgeous purple flowers.
Yeah, I could put that on my
You could put that on your windowsill with all the other ones.
Yes, with my Neophanetias. I think Mark gets his love of orchids from me because I've always loved orchids. And when I got married, I carried a white Bible with a spray of cymbidiums on them. I've always been interested, so maybe it's in the DNA or something like that. I do waterings sometimes.
You do waterings, do you? Do waterings?
Yes, I got very wet the other day, didn't I?
Yeah. That was a pure accident, it wasn't my fault.
I think it was your fault. I don't think it was mine. You didn't tell me
I didn't tell you.
Should wear a cape, did you?
No. We have a laugh together, don't we?
Yes, we do. Yeah,
Not at the same time.
No, we do have a laugh.
Now this is a new species which I grow. It's called Neophanatia falcata, and all of these are the same species, but they all have different forms. Really, really easy to grow. They love a windowsill, they love bright light, they can cope with a cold, and they're scented. So at night you get a fantastic perfume from them. Each of the forms vary. They actually were grown in Japan about 400 years ago. Traditionally they were grown in these little moss mounds like this, which are hollow underneath. But nowadays we grow all ours in bark and pumice, which is completely sustainable. So we are now where the magic happens. This is my little laboratory, and this is where we grow all the seed. The orchid seeds are like dust. It's so fine. And they're different to normal seeds because it doesn't carry the energy, the carbohydrates in the seed for it to grow. It's really only the DNA, the information to get it growing, which is in that seed. So we take the seeds, we sterilize them, and then you put them onto this jelly plate. So essentially that's agar and nutrients and other goodies in there. We tend to keep these in the dark for 9 to 12 months, and if the seed is viable, they germinate, and you end up with lots of little protocorms like this. They haven't quite started developing their leaves yet. We'll prick those out one at a time, like you would do tomatoes or dahlias, and you'd then get these larger plants which would grow within 12 to 18 months. From sowing the seed on this jelly to the seed maturing, growing, being replated and ready to take out of here is about 3 years. I love this part because I sit in here, there's peace and quiet, I'm not disturbed, and I can just tootle in my own little world. One of the myths about growing orchids is they all have to be in bright light the whole time, and that's not true. A lot of the orchids we grow actually prefer 50% shade or dappled shade. So a net curtain on a south-facing window, some of them even like north windows, and where they want just shade all year round. Very few of them like bright, burning light. The mistakes I think people make with orchids are that they like them to be continually wet. They hate really thick water. They love to have moisture at the roots. So check your media, you check your compost. They love air at the roots. I grow everything in clear pots, so you can examine the roots, you can make sure it's healthy, you can see when it needs watering, but then you can put it straight back into a black pot for it to grow happily. The mix we use is really, really open, very large pieces of bark, very large pieces of pumice. So the pumice really opens it up, and what I've found helps these is if you take a large piece of pumice and just bury it under the root of it, that enables it to stay much more open as a mix. And an open mix is a good mix. Have a look around the side, make sure there's lots of gaps. You want lots of moisture in there. You don't want it to be waterlogged or sodden in any way. I can't imagine a life without orchids. I love the challenge they give. They are hard work, they're tricky, but on the other hand, they're deeply rewarding when they flower. And I think the beauty in them is just fantastic.
I love the way that gardening has such a broad church, such a wide appeal. You have people like Mark who clearly have devoted his life to orchids with over 100,000 of the plants and a great expert, and others who just enjoy the space and making things up and changing it, not worrying too much about individual plants. And of course, that's why gardening is so fantastic, because there is something there for everybody. Now, I have a small collection of succulents here, and they're very easy to grow from cuttings. What you need to do is choose a stem that's nice and straight. I've got a good one there. Now, with most cuttings, you pot them up, you spray them, you might put them in a bag, just to keep them alive until they form roots. But with succulents, you need to let them callus first. So actually, the important thing to do at this stage is nothing. Just leave them where they will be dry, like that, and the base where you cut will scar over, and it won't form roots until that scar is there, and that will take at least 2 weeks. But actually, I've got some that I did earlier. There's a good boy. Come on. I took these cuttings about 6 to 8 weeks ago. Normally, I would say wait until you see really positive signs of new growth or roots coming out the bottom of the pot. But for these, I think we can risk it. So what I'll do is tip them out very carefully. Well, we've certainly got some roots. What's interesting is that one there has got roots, good roots. That one there has got roots. That, not so much. But I can put that back in. So I'm going to put that to one side, because you can see, essentially, it's calloused over. It just hasn't yet formed roots. It's not the end of the road. So I've got 2 that I can pot up. Now, I've got some grit here, because I want to make the mix really, really free draining. So I'm just going to add it to my normal mix. So I've got a really good gritty one. that. Pop it in. Now, rather than push this into the mix, obviously I've got fairly fragile roots in there. So we're going to pop that like that, get my mix, try not to break the roots, and go around it, like that. Put some grit around it, and water it once, and then you won't need to water that again for at least another month. And I would say from now through till next March, watering once a month is plenty. You don't need to do more than that. The danger is always from overwatering, not underwatering. So that's fine. That's going to grow and be okay. I will pot this one up in the same manner, but while I'm doing this, here are your jobs for the weekend. It's important to try and ripen existing tomatoes rather than developing new fruit. So cut off the plants just above the top truss with green fruits on it. Take off any excess leaves, and then you can get maximum sunlight and energy into ripening those green fruits. Don't be worried if your pond has a film of algae or weed. That's perfectly normal at this time of year. But you can improve it by gently skimming off the excess and placing this on the side of the pond. Leave it there for 24 hours so any aquatic creatures can make their way back into the water, and then you can take it to the compost heap. The changing climate means that our autumns are definitely getting milder, and it's worth sowing some dwarf beans now for harvest in late October and even into November. Either put one seed in a plug, or as I am, space them out in a large seed tray. Cover them over, put them somewhere warm to germinate, water them, and they can be planted out in about a month's time. I think the dual garden is looking as good as it ever has done, really. And I don't take any real personal credit for that, because although, of course, every year we plant and try and make it look as good as possible using a mixture of plants from cosmos to sunflowers to zinnias, I never draw a plan. I don't lay it all out and then it's done exactly as I intend it to be. I feel my way into it. We sort of put plants where there are gaps and hope they're going to make good combinations. Well, I think they have made good combinations this year. Plants like this David Howard dahlia and the nasturtiums and the gingers, and then with the purple of the clematis behind, that is working well for me. And I know that this may be a temporary thing. It'll pass and I'll never be able to replicate it exactly like this, but I do enjoy it while it lasts. Well, that's it for today. But I'll be back here at 8 o'clock next Friday. So until then, bye-bye.